There are moments when the deepest pain comes not from strangers, but from those we have loved the most. Why would a son belittle his own mother? This question not only tears families apart, but also reveals one of the most challenging truths about the human psyche. In this video, we will delve into the depths of psychoanalysis together to understand why these painful dynamics emerge. You will see how unconscious conflicts, cultural influences, and the shadows of personality lead to this destructive behavior. By the end, you will not only understand the psychological mechanisms at play, but also gain a clearer perspective on the complexity of human bonds. Let's begin with the truth that Carl Jung recognized. What we fight in others is often what we cannot bear within ourselves. When an adult son demeans his mother, we are not talking about a fleeting moment of impatience or temporary frustration. We are referring to a systematic pattern of disrespect that is deeply rooted in the unconscious structures of the psyche. This behavior does not arise from indifference, but from an overwhelming emotional entanglement that has never found a healthy resolution. Jung taught us that in the son's psyche, the mother is not just a person, but an archetype. She represents the primal source, security, but also dependence. When a son directs his negativity toward his mother, he is not just fighting against an individual, but against the entire spectrum of his earliest emotional experiences. He is combating the memory of his own helplessness, his neediness, and his original vulnerability. This demeaning behavior becomes the language for an emotion that has found no other form of expression. Imagine a child who never learned to name his complex feelings for his mother, becoming an adult who can only express those feelings through negative actions. The love that was too overwhelming turns into anger. The gratitude that feels too heavy becomes resentment. The longing for closeness transforms into a harsh pushing away. This dynamic becomes particularly evident in moments when the mother shows vulnerability. As she ages, if she becomes ill, or when she needs help, the original distribution of roles is turned upside down. The son, who was once the one in need of help, suddenly finds himself in a position of strength. Yet, instead of approaching this change with compassion, he may react with an unconscious response stemming from all the years of feeling dependent. Carl Jung observed that we often push back against what is most similar to us or what reminds us of our own weaknesses. The mother who dedicated her entire life to her son becomes a mirror of his own neediness. Her love reminds him that he was once completely dependent on her. Her pride in him confronts him with the fact that his identity is partly built on her devotion. Here lies one of the deepest psychological truths. Demeaning the mother is often a desperate attempt to free oneself from this emotional debt. The son tries to create distance through harshness, a distance that seems emotionally unattainable otherwise. He believes he can only be truly autonomous if he devalues the source of his original dependence. But this approach never works. Every negative action against the mother is also an action against a part of himself. Every time he belittles her, he also belittles the child within him who once loved this woman unconditionally. The harshness becomes a vicious cycle in which the son sinks ever deeper into his own emotional wounds. Freud would say that repression is at work here. The son represses positive feelings for his mother because they seem too threatening. They threaten his self-image as an independent, strong man, so the repressed feelings return in the form of aggression. The love that is not allowed to be lived turns into destructive impulses. Let's look at this more closely. When a son demeans his mother, he is often speaking a language of projection. He projects his own weaknesses, fears, and unfulfilled longings onto her. The mother becomes the scapegoat for all his own inadequacies. She is accused of being too clingy, while he himself has not learned to set healthy boundaries. She is portrayed as manipulative, while he himself cannot honestly communicate his own emotional needs. These projections are often so massive that the son no longer perceives the mother's reality. He only sees the distorted image that reflects his own unconscious conflicts. The living, complex woman disappears behind the shadow of his own psychological struggles. Jung also taught us that the shadow contains everything we reject about ourselves. When a son systematically belittles his mother, he is often fighting qualities in her that he also carries within himself, but cannot accept. Her emotionality is targeted because he fears his own feelings. Her care is mocked because he cannot admit his own longing for connection. The tragedy is that these struggles maintain a connection that should have been transformed long ago. The son who demeans his mother is, paradoxically, still enmeshed with her. He fights against her so fiercely because he has never truly left her emotionally. The aggression becomes a distorted form of attachment. Here, another dimension of this dynamic reveals itself: the fear of individuation. Jung described individuation as the process by which a person finds their true self. This process requires separation from the parents, but in a way that honors both sides. The son who demeans his mother has never completed this separation. He is stuck in a stage of rebellion that actually belongs to adolescence. But this is not the healthy rebellion of a teenager testing his limits. It is the bitter rebellion of an adult who never learned to develop his autonomy in a mature way. The humiliation of the mother becomes a ritual through which he repeatedly tries to prove that he is free, while in reality he is trapped in his own unconscious patterns. The mother in this dynamic becomes a tragic figure. She has often dedicated her entire life to raising and caring for him, only to have that devotion met with contempt. Yet, she is not free from unconscious contributions to this dynamic. Sometimes, she has difficulty letting the son go. Sometimes, she clings to the mother role because she has defined her own identity through it. Jung recognized that in every destructive relationship, both sides unconsciously contribute to maintaining the dynamic. The mother who repeatedly allows herself to be demeaned may be sending unconscious signals that reinforce this treatment. She accepts the victim role because she believes it is the only way to maintain a connection with her son. However, this acceptance is also an expression of unresolved psychological conflicts. A mother who allows herself to be systematically belittled may have never learned to recognize her own value independent of her role as a mother. She sacrifices her dignity because she believes love requires sacrifice. She confuses self-abandonment with devotion. The truth is, however, that this kind of self-sacrifice does not help the son. On the contrary, it reinforces his contempt because it shows him that he has power over her. A person who does not respect themselves can hardly win the respect of others. The mother who sets no boundaries teaches her son to misuse that lack of boundaries. Here, the complexity of the human psyche is revealed in all its tragedy. Both sides are trapped in unconscious patterns they cannot see through. The son fights against a mother who does not exist in the form he is fighting against. The mother loves a son who interprets her love as weakness and punishes her for it. This dynamic is often passed down through generations. A son who demeans his mother may have witnessed how his father treated his mother. He unconsciously reproduces patterns he internalized in his childhood. The disrespect toward the woman becomes a learned behavior that is perceived as normal. At the same time, a mother who allows herself to be demeaned may have had a childhood where self-respect was not encouraged. She passes on to her son what she herself never learned: the art of respecting and protecting oneself. Thus, a cycle of emotional pain is perpetuated, which can only be broken through conscious work on these unconscious patterns. This requires courage from both sides, the courage to recognize and integrate their own shadows. Another crucial factor in this destructive dynamic is what we can call a narcissistic injury. As the son grows up and is confronted with his own shortcomings, the mother can become a threatening witness to his weaknesses. She has seen him in his most vulnerable moments. She knows his fears, his tears, his childlike dependencies. For a man trying to maintain an image of strength and invulnerability, this witness becomes an unbearable threat. The mother is no longer perceived as a loving protector, but as a threat to his fragile self-image. Her very existence reminds him that he was once small, helpless, and needy. Jung would describe this as a conflict between the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask we show the world, while the shadow contains everything we reject about ourselves. The mother becomes a living symbol of the shadow because she embodies the memory of the son's vulnerable, dependent side. This narcissistic dynamic is further intensified by cultural factors. In our society, men are often expected to be independent, strong, and emotionally reserved. A man who openly speaks of his love for his mother or appreciates her care is often seen as unmanly. These societal expectations force many men to deny their natural emotional bonds. The demeaning of the mother then becomes a perverted form of self-assertion. The son believes he can only prove his masculinity by denigrating feminine care. He confuses harshness with strength, indifference with autonomy. This confusion is particularly evident in moments when the mother needs emotional support. When she gets sick, when she ages, when she asks for help. The son often reacts with defensiveness or even contempt. Her weakness confronts him with his own mortality, his own vulnerability. Instead of accepting this reality, he projects his fear onto her and makes her the one to blame for his own anxieties. Freud taught us that we often dislike what we fear most. The son who demeans his aging mother may be fighting his own fear of aging, of dependence, of mortality. The mother becomes a scapegoat for existential fears that he cannot cope with. This projection is particularly painful because it punishes the mother for something for which she is not responsible. She is blamed for her own vulnerability, for her natural human needs. The son, who has never learned to deal with his own weaknesses, makes the mother the embodiment of everything he rejects about the human condition. Jung recognized that the integration of the shadow is an essential part of psychological development. The son who demeans his mother has never completed this integration. Instead, he has projected his shadows onto her and fights them where he thinks it's safe. But this strategy never leads to true liberation, only to a deepening of the inner division. The real tragedy is that this demeaning behavior often escalates precisely when the mother needs the most love and support. The son who attacks his mother in her vulnerability robs himself of the opportunity to develop true maturity and compassion. He remains in an adolescent stage of emotional development, where weakness can only be managed through aggression. Here, another dimension of social conditioning becomes apparent. Men in our culture are often not encouraged to show care or take emotional responsibility. When the aging mother needs support, many sons feel overwhelmed and react with defensiveness. They have never learned how to provide loving care for others because this role has traditionally been assigned to women. The demeaning behavior then becomes a defense mechanism against feeling overwhelmed. Instead of learning how to offer caring support, the son blames the mother for needing support in the first place. He punishes her for her neediness instead of recognizing and developing his own inability to provide care. This dynamic is further exacerbated by modern living situations. Many sons live far away from their mothers and have their own professional and family obligations. The physical distance often becomes emotional distance, and the mother becomes an abstract figure onto whom frustrations and unconscious conflicts can be acted out. Technology, which should actually enable connection, often becomes a tool for disrespect. Messages go unanswered, calls are ignored, visits are postponed or avoided altogether. This passive aggression is often even more painful than open confrontation because it keeps the mother in a state of uncertainty and silent suffering. Jung taught us that behind every strong emotional reaction lies an unconscious complex. The son who reacts so strongly against his mother may be struggling with a mother complex that has shaped his entire personality development. This complex can include both excessive dependence and excessive defensiveness. Some sons are so deeply enmeshed with their mothers that they have never fully developed their own identity. They still exist in a symbiotic relationship that threatens their autonomy. The demeaning behavior then becomes a desperate attempt to break free from this psychological entanglement. But instead of choosing a healthy separation, they choose the path of negativity. Other sons, in turn, have developed an excessive defense against everything maternal. They fear any form of emotional closeness because they equate it with a loss of autonomy. The mother becomes a threat to their hard-won independence, and they react with preemptive aggression. Both extremes show that the relationship with the mother has never found a healthy balance. The son has never learned how to be connected and autonomous at the same time. He fluctuates between total enmeshment and total defense, without ever finding the middle path of mature love. The mother in this dynamic is often a tragic figure, caught between her own needs and the desire for a connection with her son. She may have built her entire identity around the role of a mother and cannot let go without feeling like she is losing her entire reason for being. At the same time, she often unconsciously contributes to maintaining the destructive dynamic. Her inability to set boundaries, her willingness to endure disrespect, sends the son the message that his harshness is acceptable. She becomes a codependent in a system that hurts both sides. Jung recognized that true healing is only possible through the integration of the shadow and becoming aware of unconscious patterns. For the son, this means facing his own weaknesses and fears instead of projecting them onto his mother. He must learn that true strength does not lie in demeaning others, but in the ability to handle his own vulnerabilities. For the mother, it means developing her own identity beyond the role of a mother and learning to respect and protect herself. She must understand that true love sometimes means setting clear boundaries and not tolerating destructive behavior. The hard truth is that this healing often only becomes possible when both sides are willing to recognize the painful truths about themselves. The son must accept that his harsh behavior is a sign of his own inner weakness. The mother must acknowledge that her willingness to sacrifice may be standing in the way of love. This realization is painful, but it is the first step toward liberation. When both sides are ready to see through their unconscious patterns, a new form of relationship can emerge. A relationship based on mutual respect and genuine autonomy, rather than enmeshment and projection. Carl Jung taught us that the greatest treasures are often hidden in the darkest corners of our psyche. The destructive dynamic between a mother and son also holds the potential for deep healing and transformation. When the son learns to integrate his shadows, he can become a man who is both strong and compassionate. When the mother learns to respect herself, she can become a woman who loves without sacrificing herself. The demeaning behavior that stands between them today like an insurmountable chasm can become the starting point for a conscious and mature love. But this requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to explore one's own deepest fears and longings. In the end, the question is not why a son demeans his mother, but how both can find their way out of this shadow. The answer lies not in blame or justification, but in the brave willingness to recognize and transform one's own unconscious patterns. If you recognize yourself in these words, whether as a mother or a son, then know that change is possible. The first step is always awareness. The awareness that behind every harsh action is a wounded soul seeking healing. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The irritating, painful aspects of our most important relationships are often the doors to our deepest growth. The mother relationship, with all its shadows and complexities, remains one of the most powerful arenas for psychological transformation. In it are reflected not only personal dramas, but also the great themes of human existence: love and resentment, dependence and autonomy, life and mortality. If you hear these words and feel that a truth in them touches you, Please share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about your own experiences with these complex family dynamics. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more in-depth analyses of the human psyche. For it is only by understanding our darkest impulses that we can find our brightest light.